morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dream Series Episode 4, and thank you all for taking out your precious time and being here today. We have a guest speaker with us, Mr. Nilotpal Sahai, the head of equities from HSBC Asset Management. We are going to hear his views on equity market outlook. Mr. Saday Sinha, the founder and CEO of Dreamladder Capital, would be moderating the session for today. We'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, please start posting in the chat window. This you will find on your screen, and if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll be sending out the recording when it's available. Saday, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shubham. And I would like to thank you all for taking out time from your busy schedule to join Dream Series Episode 4. And I'm sure the next 1 hour and so would be very informative for all of us. We would like to thank Mr. Nilotpal Sahai, one of the reputed fund manager here in India, for giving us the privilege to share his views on market outlook and interact directly with our esteemed clients. Mr. Sahai has around 25 years experience in research and fund management. He is head of equities and senior fund manager at HSBC Asset Management. And previously he has worked with IDFC, Asset Management, Motilal Oswal Securities, and also Infosys, and etc. He is a BTech from IIT BHU and MBA from IIM Calcutta prior to joining the industry. And last to last month, he has been awarded the best fund manager in large cap category by ET Wealth and Morningstar. So welcome you, sir, on our platform. So before inviting you to speak, I would like to set the ball rolling by asking you a very broader question. Indian market saw a very, very sharp V-shaped recovery since March 23rd. In fact, no one would have even imagined this or believed you if you had told this 6 months back. But Nifty did kiss 12,000 levels and have seen some correction in last few trading sessions. So I'm sure most of us are waiting here to hear your views on how market is likely to behave going forward and how shall we position ourselves. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Saday, for kind introduction. And thank you to all the participants for joining us on a Saturday morning. The question that you were asked is a very valid question, and that is the intriguing to us, the market participants, over the last 6 hot months. So let me address that question first before I come to a couple of other points which I would like to make in the context of the drivers of the market. What people have been asking question in the past is with respect to the economy not doing as well, but the market has been strong and in fact very strong. A couple of very simple reasons. The first thing is that in the good times also, at least in the short term, the market has not been correlated with the economy. In fact, even the corporate profitability also is not correlated with the economy in the short term. And we know that the markets are related with the corporate profitability over medium to longer term. That is fine. But in the short term, they are not. In this period, when there has been a number of other parameters, X of market, for instance, in this case, it is a pandemic, then this relationship has been broken. Second point is that there are rules governing the financial market. And the rules governing the financial market are with respect to the liquidity situation, and the attendant related issue is that of the cost of capital. So when the liquidity situation is on the either extreme, either very loose or very tight, then all the equations do get broken, and which is also has happened in the current context because liquidity has been very, very loose, and that is why the asset prices has been going up. Second thing, the rules regarding the financial market is with respect to cost of capital. And we know that if the cost of capital comes down, then the value of the assets does go up. And in this period also, despite the fact that whatever has been happening in the economy, the cost of capital has been coming down. That is, the yields that we can earn on the alternative assets or any asset for that matter has been coming down, and that in turn will mean then that the value of the asset prices, financial assets in this case, will go up, and which is what has been happening. Related point, moving on to something else which has been the key drivers for the market. The key driver for the market in this period has been the determined effort of the governments and the central banks, not only in India but elsewhere also, to ensure that markets remain quite strong, and they have been successful in that. So it should not come as a surprise that the markets are doing well, because the whole idea of the monetary policy makers, the central bankers, has been to stabilize the financial market, and the whole idea of the government has been to ensure that the demand remain stable, and they give a boost to demand. In both of them, they have been partially successful, at least in the demand creation, because you only are fulfilling the lost demand on account of the lockdown. But in case of the bringing stability to the financial market, the monetary policy, the central banks has been largely been successful. In turn, that has also led to a situation of excess liquidity. In this context, it is also important to understand what is happening on the liquidity scenario globally, not only in India. It's very important, very material. I will give some data regarding that. One of the key factors which impact the emerging market flows is the weakness or strength of the dollar. It is an inverse correlation. When the dollar strengthens, then the emerging market flows weakens, or in fact, it becomes an outflow, an inflow into the US. When the dollar weakens, then the reverse is true, and the emerging market flows, or the flows outside that of the US, become stronger, and India also benefits. In fact, the bottom of the market on March 23rd also coincides with the strength of the dollar. The dollar was its peak on that day. It also happens to be on that day that the Fed in the US allowed a parallel window for exchange of the dollars and made the dollar liquidity a lot more loose outside the US also. And then began the flow of the foreign money outside of the US into the emerging market, and India also benefited. As a result of which, some data here, but to understand and get the sense, is that in the first couple of months of this calendar year, there has been a strong FPI. In next 2 months has been one of the highest outflows that the Indian stock market has seen. In fact, almost $8.5 billion outflow in the month of March is the highest ever. In the worst possible year, not month, year, in the past 30 years has been $10 billion of outflow in 2008. But in the month of March alone, we saw almost $8.5 billion of outflow. So that was the magnitude of the outflow when the dollar was strengthening. But when the trend reversal happened, we have seen that consistently the inflows has been strong. And in the month of August this year, there has been an inflow of almost $6 billion. That is the second best month ever. On a net basis, on a YTD basis, it is positive. It's close to about $6 billion positive on a YTD basis. So that would be considered as a strong FPI flow. Going forward also, and there would be questions, if the questions are regarding the state of the US elections and all that, then I will address the point with respect to what's likely to happen with respect to the emerging market flows, because from our perspective, that's what we are concerned about. But for the time being, what is important is that the flows to India are strong, and in the last 2-3 months, even if there has been weakness in the domestic market flows to the mutual fund industry, so that has been more than compensated by the FPI flows remaining strong. In the same context which I mentioned, is that if the cost of capital remains low and has remained low, then it makes all other asset classes also attractive. The third point with respect to the driver of the market has been, and the reason that we are meeting virtually is the COVID-19. Uh, we all are reading the same set of information, so I'll not get into the details of that, but only a couple of points which I would like to address with respect to the COVID-19 is that now that numbers are significantly better than what we were seeing in the mid of September when the virus spread was peaking, and since then it is stabilizing, but still numbers are still. The only point I would like to add here is that what we have realized is that even if there is a second wave, and which is what the discussion is around in the European countries, then the stringent national lockdown that we had in the first 2-3 months after the pandemic broke out, we are not going to go that route, because we have now realized is that there is a limited benefit of having an stringent national lockdown. And the damage to the economy is quite sharp. So it is unlikely that we'll go that route, even if there is a second wave. Having said that, it is also important that we get the cure or the treatment as soon as possible. So my sense is that going forward, the discussion will move away from the spread of the virus to the vaccines and the treatment, and how to make this available to as many number of people as possible as soon as possible. So that will also be having a bearing on the market as such. Final couple of points with respect to the market is that when we talk about the market, we always talk about the valuations, and valuations. Very commonly, people talk about valuations in terms of the price to earnings multiple. But it is important to look at the valuations in a composite manner, not only necessarily price to earnings. On a price to earnings basis, because at least in the near term, the earnings are elusive and it's quite volatile. So on a price to earning basis, on a near term earning, market is expensive. Market is expensive both on the absolute terms as well as with respect to its own history. However, on a price to book basis, that is an alternative way of looking at the market. It is not expensive. It is in line with the multi-year averages. Also, if we look and compare with respect to like market cap, another way of looking at the valuations on an overall perspective, then on that basis also the market is close to the averages. It should be noted is that on almost all parameters in the month of March, when the market was falling and had fallen sharply, then on both price to book as well as market cap to GDP or price to earnings, the market has reached the same level what it has reached at the peak of the global financial crisis, and from there it rebounded. So it did not come as a surprise is that from those levels the market rebounded and rebounded sharply. There's another very important valuation parameter, and so we should keep in mind, and that is a comparison of the earnings yield with the yield that we earned on alternative financial assets. And for that, sometimes we compare with the medium to longer term fixed income yield, that is 10-year GSEC, or sometimes we can also compare with the short term yields. So on both the basis we can do that. It is important to be consistent. So if one is comparing earnings yield with a 10-year GSEC yield, then we should be consistent. If one is comparing with the 1-year T-bill, 1-year GSEC, then that's what one should be consistent. Because right now the yield curve is quite steep. So as compared to the short-term rates, the equity market is quite attractive as compared to the historical measures. However, not so attractive as compared to the longer term yield. On that basis, it is on par with what we have seen in the past. The point here I'm making is that an investor has to invest money in one or other assets, and in his mind or in his calculation, he's comparing yields on the multiple asset classes, and he invests money where the yields are one of the most attractive. At the given point of time, right now, and which has been the case in the past few months, when the short-term interest rates have fallen so sharply, is that equity markets is not that expensive. Net on the valuations things, there are parameters on which the market looks expensive. There are parameters on which the market is not looking expensive. So one can say that is neither expensive nor attractive. But many times when you talk about the averages, then a lot of information does get lost. So it is important to understand though that the markets have rallied and rallied quite sharply and has gone back to the levels of the pre-pandemic level. But essentially, three of the sectors have done very well. That is IT, healthcare, and Reliance. Reliance itself is an industry, so they have done very well. On the other hand, we have got sectors like financials, real estate, and a couple of more sectors which have lagged, which have underperformed massively. So there is the market in this period also has become bipolar, and the extent of the outperformance and underperformance has been very, very sharp. So even though the market may have gone back to the but it's for financials market is expensive by over expensive in the sense it has gone up by more than 10%. Financials are down 20-25%. So huge gap has been created. I'm specifically noting financials because in the Nifty prior to pandemic, financials were 42% of the weight of the Nifty. So almost, so you can say that 42% remaining is 58%. 58% went 10% higher, 42% went 25% down, and that's where you are right now at about -4 or -5% or so. It's a day-old data. So that's what my take is on the valuations front. I would like to stop here and wait for some more questions to come. Sadai, there are a couple of other points which I would like to make in terms of the sectors or the part of the economy which is likely to, which we believe should be doing well in the current context, in the near-term context. So let me hear some questions, and I will fit in some of the point that I want to make as a part of those questions. You are on mute, Sadai. Sadai, you are on mute.
Yeah, so I was muted, sorry. So, sir, there are a few questions in the chat box, and in fact, I will ask Shubham to unmute everyone, and then one by one, people can ask questions. So there are a few questions here, sir, like, why FDI flows increased in March and August 20? So and also there is a question called, how would the Indo-China any take on Indo-China issue?
I couldn't hear the second part of the question. Also the first part. Your first part of the question was that why was the FDI flow strong in the month of August, right? But it was not as strong in the month of March. In the March, it was come down. It was one of the weakest. It was not as strong actually. In the month of August, it was quite strong. One of the regions, not the only region, apart from the region that emerging market flows were strong and then the market and the dollar was chasing higher yielding assets, was the fact that there were quite a few QIPs in the Indian market, not only in August, but in the prior month also, from the high quality private sector banks. And as I mentioned, the banks have been underperforming, even if it is the high quality large private banks. So they have been underperformance, and they came out with the QIP or offer for actually QIP raising fresh money in order to shore up their capital base. And this was a large chunk of the money which came into the market, and that is what actually helped in the having a very robust FPI number in the month of August. But it's not only the question of August. August I mentioned only because it was extremely high. The trend we have been seeing is what from the month of May itself. May, June, July, August. September was weak. Slightly, it was a negative number, but again, October has been weak. in general, the FPI flows has remained strong for the last 5 months or so. Second question was with respect to the Indo-China relationship. So we know that the geopolitical situation is very sensitive, important from the nation's perspective, but it has not been impacting the markets. And it did not also, because the impact on the economy, on the corporate profitability is more on account of the pandemic. I guess you are alluding to the situation which happened on the 15th of June, as well as second time in the month of September or so. So in both the times, there was an initial hiccup in the market, and then the market rebounded after that. That is largely to do with their, because there were other factors which were much more important. But in this context, the relationship of China with the rest of the world is also important, and that has got an economic implication. So let me bring in one of the theses that we have from the investment perspective. There has been a trend in the last couple of years on account of the tensions between US and China with respect to trade, that globally more and more countries and multinational corporations has been getting worried about too much of dependence on China from the supply chain perspective. And there was a trend of people wanting to diversify their supply chain in China. So this trend was in ascendancy in the year 2018. But in the year 2019, after the initial ramp up in this shift, there was moderation in that in the year 2019. However, the pandemic in early part of this year accelerated this diversification process. But initially, impact was largely on China. The trend began to accelerate from then onwards. In the meantime, there has been a couple of important government reforms also with respect to the ease of doing business, and there has been a new scheme which is the production linked incentive scheme by the government to promote domestic manufacturing. That one thing. So
Can you,
that
Salman,
has,
I think, sorry, sir. So please, participants, can you mute yourself? When you have a question, you can unmute and then you can ask question. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Sure. Yeah, so I was just concluding my point with respect to China. So in there, along with some of the government reforms with respect to ease of doing business, as well as that of having this production linked incentive scheme, has made some of the investment in some of the sectors in India attractive. We note that there are two sectors where India could be competitive with respect to the world. It should be noted is that it is not as a birthright that investment away from China will happen to India, because there are many countries in the vicinity of ourselves in the Southeast Asia, or in the vicinity of the consuming country like close to US, that would be Mexico and others. They all would be competing for the same set of investment, which is earlier going to China to come to their respective countries. It's not going to be easy, which is why in this context, wherever India will have competitive advantage in those sectors, it is more likely that the investment will come in. At this stage, we believe that this could be in a couple of sectors. One of them would be electronics, and the second of them could be chemicals or pharmaceutical based industry. That is the raw material side. That is what is also called API, the raw material side of the pharmaceutical industry. So those are the couple of industries and sectors where we, of course, we are also seeing in the near term, there is an improvement in the corporate result for these sectors. But over the medium to longer term also, we should expect investments to happen in those sectors and industries, and the profitability of those sectors to improve.
Okay. So, sir, there are so many questions coming on the sectoral. So, just before asking those question on the sectors, I just want to chip in on your question on your investment style. So can you throw some light on your investment philosophy, though? How you select a stock, whether you go for a top-down or bottom-up approach, or what kind of a parameters you look at while selecting a company in your portfolio, business model, moat of the business, management quality. Just a kind of a. I understand you do these things, but for the benefit of the client, I just want to hear from you on these things, sir. Please.
Sure, fine. My process is the HSBC process. I work for HSBC, so my process is the HSBC process. So it's a combination of the top-down as well as bottom-up approach of the portfolio construction. From the top-down perspective, the macro view, the economy view, the corporate sector view, which I gave, is important and material. But from the bottom-up perspective, we have got a well-defined process. What we do, we look at our universe. This universe will depend upon the mandate for which one is working. For instance, if my mandate is large cap, then my universe would be the top 100 companies. If my mandate is a small cap, then my universe would be the list of the companies outside of the 250 names, by and large. If mandate is multi-cap, then the universe could be the top 500 odd companies or so. So we look at our universe, then we try to classify these companies into 4 or 5 different stratas, the layers. What we call ourselves internally is quintiles. That is, we split them into 5 different parts. And this is based upon one profitability metric and one valuation metric. The profitability metric that we choose is ROE, return on equity. We think it is one of the single most important parameter that the corporate management as well as the shareholders should look at. And from the valuation, we look at price to book as compared to other valuation metric, simply because price to book metric is much more stable, less volatile as compared to price to earnings, EV, EBITDA, or any other valuation metric. And on based upon these 2 parameters of price to book and return on equity, we split our universe into 5 parts, and then we look at, we rank them from the most attractive to least attractive basis. And then we do our bottom-up research on each of these companies, starting from the most attractive, obviously. It does not automatically mean that what looks most attractive on this chart gets selected. It need not, and quite often it does not also. But it only means that we will look at them, we will not ignore them without doing a due diligence on those companies. Once we complete our bottom-up exercise of looking at these companies, in-depth research of those companies, then we go about portfolio construction. And at the time of the portfolio construction, we again have a view from the top-down view from the perspective of mitigating as much risk as possible. So we mitigate concentration risk, diversify, we cross sectors and within sectors also. And we also ensure that it is a good mix of growth stocks, value stocks, and other where the earnings momentum is also good. So that's how we do our portfolio construction. And this is our HSBC process we do for all our portfolio like this.
Thank you so much for explaining your process, sir. There are many questions in the chat box. One gentleman is asking, what are the early signs of revival of any sector? And also I'll club another question with this. Which sectors you believe are going to do better in the days to come and why?
Okay, so let me answer the second question first, and probably answer to the first questions will also begin to flow in from the second question. The way we are looking at things right now from the economy perspective is that if I look very broadly, consisting of the retail, households, government, and the corporate sector, and within corporate sector, either the large corporate sector and the SMEs, then we see that the household has been impacted, especially lower end on account of the initially on account of the loss of income, loss of jobs. Initially on loss of income, and later on probably on account of the loss of jobs also. But now we also see that the income is going back up. Many of these companies are restoring the cut in the wages and salaries. Jobs we have to still see, specifically not in the corporate sector, but in the SME and MSME, and that's where all the biggest problem lies. We also see there is a problem with respect to government, in the sense that their resource mobilization this year would be weaker, much weaker than what was budgeted for, simply on account of lower tax collection and also on account of election. As a result of which, what we see is that in the overall economy, only consumptions will be able to hold up. And that too not very strongly, because as we also know that the overall income of the household has also been coming down. So initially, the basic consumption will hold on and has been able to hold on to in the recent months. And going forward, we also believe some of the aspirational and discretionary spending will also come back, because there's an element of the pent-up demand for the last 4 or 5 months, and as well as that when the getting restored, at least in the corporate sector, in the larger corporate. So the consumption of those salaried classes will come back. So we'll see, and we are already beginning to see in some cases that the discretionary consumption is coming back. What is going to get hurt and has been the investment part of the economy. One has been talking and wanting. So I want to differentiate here between what we are expecting and what we want. We obviously want the infrastructure spending to go up, the capex to happen, but it did not happen, and it will not happen simply because there is no money available. Both private sector capex has been weak and elusive in the past, and it's unlikely to come in, especially because the return on equity has been coming down and likely to remain weak. The profitability of the overall corporate sector is weak in FY21, will probably remain weak in FY22 also. So the private sector capex will come only subsequent to that. Also because capacity utilization levels are on the lower side. At the same time, the government, which was able to hold on in the previous years and make up some of the lower capex by the private sector, will also be weak in the current year, because as I mentioned, the government resources has been weak, and whatever resources, the first priority of the government should be and is for the welfare economics as compared to investment into infrastructure. This is not to undermine the fact that the desire to invest in infrastructure is high and will remain high, but simply there is no capacity at this point of time, there is no money available, and that will also take some time. So one expects the investment part of the economy to be weak, the consumption part of the economy to be moderately strong. The exporting part of the economy is likely to be stronger, simply because rest of the world, especially the developed nations, have rebounded faster. And we also see that because India's bulk of the exports are into the intellectual property, that is technology and the healthcare related sectors, and the impact in those sectors is much less as compared to the other basic industries sectors. So which is why the export part of the economy would be strong. So the sectors flowing out of the exporting sectors, technology and healthcare would be strong, followed by the consumer sector and followed by the investment sector. This is not necessarily mean that these may or may not be the best investment ideas, because from the investment idea, you also have to consider not only is that how is that particular sector has done well, but how much of that is already priced in. For instance, in case of technology, or to some extent in healthcare also, so the outlook is very strong in the near term as well as from the medium term, but some of that already may have got factored into the prices, as the valuation of those sectors are 1 or 2 standard deviation higher than their long-term averages. On the other hand, we know that certain sectors are weak and very weak, as I mentioned, financials, but there are parts of the financials where the weakness in the stock performance is much more than what would be a weakness in their actual delivery of the performance. So that makes a better idea. What was the first part of the question? The first question was, I think, how do you pick and choose a particular sector, right? Was that the question?
The question was in the sectoral colors, which sector is likely to do well. So broadly, you have answered that question.
That was the second one. The first one was some other question was there. So I think I would like to address that by saying there are a couple of theoretical constructs that a person can keep in mind. For instance, if a sector is fragmenting, then usually the profit pool disintegrates, and in general, even the stronger players do find it tough to grow in that particular environment. The converse is also true. When a sector is consolidating, then the profit pool also increases. At the same time, within the same profit pool, the dominant players and the bigger players do far better, and that's where you make a lot of money. Let me give some example. Telecom sector is one of the best examples. Now, when the telecom sector was fragmenting, that is from 2006 to 2016. Till 2006, India had 4 or 5 telecom players. But after the new wave of licenses, which was given in 2007, over next 7, 8 years, the number of players went to 10, which is not what we have seen any part of the world. So quite clearly, the telecom sector was fragmenting. So it should not uh, come as a surprise to anyone that the profit pool, the overall profit of the sector vanished completely. The whole sector was in losses. It was in complete mess, and the players were not even able to recover the investment that they made. On the other hand, after the entry of Jio over the last 3, 4 years, 2015-16 onwards till 2019, 10-player market became 3-player market plus BSNL, which means the industry was consolidating. So even though the profit has still not come back in the same measure that one expects, but it will come back simply because now industry is consolidated. It should not again have come as a surprise that there were a tariff hike last year. There could be a tariff hike in the near future also, simply because the industry is consolidating. The profit would be back for the sector. But it's also important to note is that when these kind of things happen, usually and more often than not, the benefit is highest to the sector leaders, maybe top 1 or 2 players. In this case, there are only 3 players, so obviously top 2 players will get the bulk of that benefit. But in other sectors also, when the sector is consolidating, the top players do get disproportionate benefit. That is one way of looking at things. The second way of looking at which sector and how is likely to do well is to look from the perspective of the capex happening in those sectors. What is the capacity utilization? What is the return on equity of that particular sector? If the incremental capital which goes into that particular sector or particular company, if that is not dilutive to their return on capital employed, ROIC, ROC, whichever metric one wants to look at, in which case the incremental investment is extremely profitable. But on the other hand, if the capital deployed in a particular sector or the companies leads to dilution of the ROCs and ROEs, then that's a situation that is not a very attractive proposition. That means one is getting growth for the sake of it, but it is a dilutive growth. And in that case, even if the overall earnings, the profit of the sector and the company might go up, but the existing shareholders will not benefit, because that benefit is accruing to the newer shareholders or the newer providers of the capital, and they are taking a much higher share from the existing shareholders also. So that would be dilutive. So it is also important to see is that what is happening to the return on incremental capital, invested capital, or return on the capital employed. If that is going up, that is one of the best measures to look at the sectors to be investing in.
There are so many questions, but I'll encourage if participants can unmute yourself and you can ask question directly.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand from you on the financial side, going forward next 2-3 quarters, how do you see the numbers getting reported, the extent of damage because of COVID, moratorium? Do you think a large part of that is already discovered, or is there more pain left in the sector?
Yeah, a good question, fair question, because I also alluded to financials couple of times in my initial call. So it's important to understand like what is likely to happen and how much the market is discounting. So one thing is for sure that the financials have underperformed. So markets are very worried about the health of the financials, and in this case, the banks and the NFCs and other financial institutions. And to a large extent, market is right because the financial sector does get impacted if anything happens to the economy. And in this case, if you see a damage to the economy is to the extent of 10% of GDP, then quite obviously the NPAs will rise, and NPAs will rise most meaningfully. That is the first part. Second part, it is very difficult to gauge what would be the eventual NPA of the system. Now, this is withstanding, notwithstanding the judgment which will come in the Supreme Court with respect to classification of NPA. As of now, there is a stay on classifying any loan as NPA. I think that final judgment will come in the current week, in which you can classify. But notwithstanding that, I'm looking from the perspective what would be the total non-performing asset created over next, not only in 3 months, but in 12 to 24 months for the period for which the restructuring of is also allowed. So there is no straight answer. So what we try to do is to look at it from a couple of perspectives indirectly and try to come to a number. So what we realized actually, given that the market has punished the financial sector quite badly as compared to the rest of the market, if we believe that financials should have performed in line in terms of the valuation, in line with the rest of the market, that means market believes that there would be a massive erosion in the net worth of the financials, and which is why their current market value, market capitalization has come down. That is because I'm assuming one part, that is the price to earning or price to book in case of financials, also to move in the same direction, similar to what is happening for the rest of the market. This is an assumption. So if that assumption were true, then the other part of the equation, that is the net worth, will get eroded, and which is why market cap. So extent of the erosion in the net worth, which is on a post-tax basis, we reckon is to the extent of 4 lakh crores. That means on a pre-tax basis, the market is expecting a net worth erosion of something like 6 lakh crores. So this erosion in the net worth to the extent of 6 lakh crores will only happen if the market believes that the total new NPA, this is nothing to do with the NPA creation in the normal course of time, but market believes that on account of COVID, there could be almost 6 lakh crores of the NPA created. Now we try to figure out from some other perspective, can this be true? Now, given that about 15 to 16 lakh crores of the banking sector loan is for SME, assuming that 10% of that particular loan can go bad, some percentage is there for the retail assets, retail sector, some percentage of that loan could go bad. Corporate sector is, by the way, doing one of the best. One does not expect a meaningful increase in the NPA of the large corporate sector. So we reckon that what actually the NPA of the financial system could be much lower than what market is ascribing at this point of time. We have got some glimpse of that in a couple of corporate sector, the bank's result which has been declared so far in this quarter, but a lot of the picture would get clearer only in the subsequent quarter, December quarter and the March quarter. But our sense and our belief is that the market is overestimating the extent of NPA created by almost 25%. Now, but at the same time, I would also like to add, this is not a definitive thing. If by any chance the market fear about the NPA creation in the banking system comes true, that is the total new NPA created is in the vicinity of something like 6 lakh crores, in which case the damage to the economy would be much sharper than what market is ascribing this point of time. So we believe that there would be a meeting ground of the rest of the market and financials. So either financials should do better, especially the large private sector banks and the corporate sector, or rest of the market should not do as strong, especially the one linked to the domestic economy as the market believes at this point of time. Nick, was there a second part of your question?
So just on that moratorium thing, I just want to understand what extent has been recognized, because banks do keep telling that percentage it's coming down quarter on quarter, but is that a fair representation of the NPA in the system because of the COVID?
That is true. Right now, there is no moratorium. Moratorium got over on 31st of August. So there is no moratorium. The banks will not disclose, the banks will not have anything in moratorium. Also, because the time given for the restructuring is 31st December, so even the restructuring picture also will not be clear in this quarter. Some banks have said, in fact, most of the banks have so far said that very little has come for restructuring. Which is why I said that the picture will become clearer only by December quarter or by March quarter. Maybe it could be even one quarter later than that. And which is why the broader estimate, which I told you becomes important from that perspective, is that it might get reported right now, next quarter or the next quarter. I am more interested in seeing like what would be the damage to the net worth of these banks than what is going to happen in this current quarter.
Yeah.
All
right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Rajesh, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I have two questions. Nilotpal, thanks for giving a very good perspective of the economy and also onto the financial sector. But my one question is related to financial sector, that in what time frame do you see that the financial sector would bounce back? And the second question is there that does it make sense to start accumulating aviation, hospitality and real estate sector, which looks now that in next 5 to 6 months, if vaccine things are available, then aviation sector, which has already started showing early shoots, will these sectors will pick up? And as a long-term strategy, can we start accumulating at these levels, or we have to wait for some more time?
Thank you, Rajesh, for all these, both these probing questions. With respect to financials, I would say that there is no time frame that one can say is that in which they will begin to recover. But I would like to make a distinction between the financial sector and what is available in the stock market. Because what is 90% of the stock market financial sector is actually only 30% of the actual financial sector. By that, I mean the top 4 private banks and a couple of NBFCs, they are roughly 30-35% of the Nifty. A very large Nifty and almost 90% of the financial sector within Nifty. The only thing which is outside these 4 banks and a couple of NBFCs is State Bank of India. But when it comes to these 4 banks and the NBFCs as a part of the overall financial sector, they would be less than 30% of the overall financial sector. So there are a couple of points here. The firstly, we are, and at least myself, definitely myself, will not be taking a call on the overall financial sector, because that I believe will continue to suffer. As I mentioned, is that even if the NPA number is not as bad as what market is describing, yet it is quite bad. And it has to flow through the profit and loss, it has to flow through the balance sheet, and is going to impact these banks quite materially. But there again, the distinction which I wanted to make is that the banks will share this pain in a disproportionate manner. Some of the banks would fare much worse, and some of the banks will come out largely unscathed. Everyone will have their share of incremental NPA, but largely unscathed. This distinction is important because from the investment perspective, I'm not investing in the financial sector, but I'm investing in certain banks, and I'll pick and choose the banks where the impact is going to be less, which is why I already stressed a couple of times the preference for the large private banks as compared to the overall financial sector, which I believe would be better off in the overall context. And 1 year, 2 years later, when the dust settles down, we will realize these private banks have become even stronger. Rajesh, shall I move to the second part of your question? Second question on aviation and others, or any
Yeah,
supplementary
sure.
question on the
Yeah.
financials? Okay. Now,
No, thanks.
your second question was with respect to aviation and hospitality and other sectors. I guess what you
Real
meant
estate.
was
Real
that
estate.
all the sectors which is quite badly impacted on account of pandemic, and they have yet to open up. What is in future for them? Because in other places where there has been an opening of the economy and the sectors have opened up, so we can get out like how much of normalcy they have returned to, and we can get an estimate. In the cases where the sectors are yet to open up, like in case of hospitality as well as that of the airlines, real estate is a different case. Real estate was not shut down on account of pandemic, but it was just that people were not buying. And but real estate has been going through a pain even much before the pandemic. So they have got a different dynamic at play.
Hello.
But when it
I
comes
just
to,
hello. I sorry to disturb you. Just come back to the point that private
yeah,
bank you said will be some private bank will be again more, right?
yeah,
Hello.
relatively.
Yeah. So in the private bank sector, do you feel that it will be within 6 months or maybe 1 year time it will be grow more than other public limited banks or public banks, especially HDFCs, ICICI Bank. This comes in this factors private banks.
See, the investment will never be for 3 months or 6 months. The investment will always be for perpetuity. So as I mentioned, that when the dust settles down, it could be like the 12 months, 24 months, it could be longer. And it's a continuous process. So I'm not looking at any end period at which this process of the shift of market share from the weaker part of financials to a stronger part of financials will stop. I think that will continue and will continue for a much longer period than 3 to 6 months. So I'm not looking at a smaller particular time frame, a small time frame in which this shift will happen, or in which this benefit will accrue. I think this will continue for a much longer period. Now,
Okay,
moving
thank
on
you.
to the question which I was answering on the airlines and on hospitality sector, there my view is different because we still don't have any information and data when the sectors will be opened up fully and what kind of recovery and activity that we will see. So there, the way I would want to look at is that again, when the industry stabilizes, then how does the profit pool shift? My general view is that the bigger the disruption in a particular sector, the higher the polarization in that particular sector. And higher the polarization means that the more dominant players will become stronger and even more dominant. To give an example, basically without taking a name, that let's say in airlines industry, I think the dominant player, the biggest player was having a market share of something into high 40s. But what we understand right now is market share has now gone into high 50s. Now that is significant jump in the market share in a very short period of last 6 odd months. In the past, we have seen this 8 to 10% market share gain over a 5-year period. And that too, when some of the weaker airline players, they have shut shop, then only the market share shift has happened. But if on account of this pandemic, the market share shift happens, and if the market share shift is of this magnitude, then normally what the benefit happens over 4 or 5 years can happen in a very shorter window. Now, for investment, again, one has to realize is that how much of that has got factored in. One will actually realize is that the leading airline company is trading at a higher than the pre-pandemic level. So what it means is this: even if the operations has been shut for last 6 months, but the valuation or the value of that particular business is higher than the pre-pandemic, as if nothing has happened in the pandemic, which is not true, but true also. Not true in the sense that obviously the airlines have been shut, so operations has been impacted very badly. But the market is also saying is that as and when the sector will open up, this particular company's return to profitability and to normalcy will be much sharper, much faster, and then let me already be there. So in any such case, one actually need not wait for a timing. One cannot actually time one's purchases into or investments along with the opening of the sector. It has to come with the realization that if this is what is going to happen to the industry structure, then It is a question of, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when it's a question of when, not if, then one can always go and make an investment. In some cases, already market may have factored in. So I'm not saying that one should do it right now. But as and when one realizes, then one should not wait for the right time of when, but answering sufficiently for the if, that is it going to happen like this. If it happens, then we can still make a good investment sense. Jesh?
Yeah. Next question. Sneha sir, you want to ask any question? Manish sir? Or shall I take question from the chat window? Okay, sir, there are a few questions in the chat window. I know one person is asking about the effect of US election on the Indian market if Democratic Party comes into power. So I know it's very difficult, nobody knows, but do you want to try this question, sir?
Yeah, you already answered part of it because we don't know, and we know and we do not know, because already so many people are actually doing so much of work on figuring out like who is going to win, and it's anyway going to happen in the next 4 days. But that is the first imponderable. Will we get to know the result on the 4th of November, or it can take time? This time it could take time because of the mail-in voters and all that. But this is not what we're concerned with. What we are concerned with actually from our Indian perspective is that, and especially from the Indian stock market perspective, because that's where this particular gathering is that how is the US election going to make an impact? So best way of looking at these things is to have scenarios. So one scenario is that of Trump wins. Second scenario is Biden wins. The third scenario, which could be in both the cases, that the presidency and the legislature is into different parties. That is, Trump is president and Democrats control both Commons and House of Commons and Senate, or vice versa. Biden wins presidency and Republicans continue to hold on to Senate and all that. And the fourth one, which I mentioned just now, is that we do not get an answer for an extended period, and that is on account of it becomes a contested election, and we get to know the result only much later, even later than, let's say, January. So in the four scenarios, let's look at what is the best case scenario and what is the worst case scenario, rather than trying to figure out like who is going to not win. In case of Trump winning the election, we know what it is. It is going to be like a status quo. So that answer is probably known to a lot of people. In case of a Biden victory, and specifically if the Democrats also win Senate, in which case we can expect much looser fiscal policy and a lot more spending, in which case dollar can weaken. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, a weakness in dollar can increase emerging market flows and thus benefit India flows as well. The third one, or let me take the fourth one, that if it is going to be a contested election, that means not much of fiscal action will take place, at least for next couple of months, till the time the presidency is decided, in which case we expect Fed to step in and there would be a looser monetary policy, or their bond buying program will accelerate, in which case also could be positive for the emerging market flows. The worst case scenario is that of gridlock. That means the presidency and the legislature into the different parties, and they continue to fight and bicker over almost everything, which is what has been happening in the last few months, in which case the stimulus packages would get delayed. That possibly is one of the worst scenarios. Not so bad, but still among the four scenarios, that is the worst scenario from the US election perspective. Nonetheless, US elections also does have an impact on globally in terms of both sentiments as well as in the policy making. So it has got even some far-reaching impact also from the perspective of what's going to happen between US and China relationship. So I'll not go deep into this because only another 3-4 days are left. So let's get to see what's happening on the election, and then we can talk about like what our view is with respect to China in the newer administration. I hope this my answer is satisfactory, or anything else is expected. Then you can ask supplementary question.
Okay, so there is one question in the pharma sector, and the gentleman is asking that around 80% of the pharma raw material comes from China, and because of this, there is gap in the demand and supply of raw material. What is the future of the pharma sector? So along with this, I also want to squeeze something on the pharma. Pharma sector has seen, if you compare from April 2015, almost market cap came down for all the listed players around 50%, and since Jan we have seen a very sharp recovery. So what is your take on this China, and how one should play at current level if somebody is not invested in the pharma thematic fund?
So, no, very, very good question, very fair question. I think that's one of the concerns. But I would only like to add in that 80% or the number close to 80% is right in terms of dependence on China when it comes to API or the key raw material. But and there was a disruption, as I also mentioned, in the early part of this year when China was suffering from the pandemic and the rest of the world was not. But now that supply chain is restored fully. So China is producing and supplying as much as it was prior to pandemic. So now there is no change. Now, if India is still doing well and growing in the API market and in the specialty chemical segment, that is because of the strength of the Indian companies themselves and their ability to win orders. It is not on account of the disruption in China. It is because that is restored, and it is the strength of the Indian companies that they are still able to grow and grow at a much faster pace. So that was the first part of the question. Second part of the question was respect to the stock market perspective. There, my view is that even though the healthcare sector or the pharma sector has done well, very well, but I still believe there is a lot of steam left in this company simply because still some legs of the some drivers of the earning healthcare sector is yet to fully materialize. And that is with respect to those businesses which have got exposure to US generic market. And we believe that that particular part of the business, which was not doing well in the period of 2017, 18, 19, has just come back to life in last couple of quarters. We think there's still a long way to go in that particular thing. We are still not calling that it will go back to the glory days of 2016 and before that, but still a lot more improvement can happen, both from the perspective of the volume of the drugs, as well as lesser pricing pressure on the sale to the US generic drugs. And that will mean an improved profitability for Indian companies, those which are into that segment. Along with that, the Indian pharma scene is also reasonably okay. It is largely factored in, and people are aware of what kind of growth can be expected from the Indian pharma market from the past few years. And there's not much of change in that. There has been a decline in the acute segment. That is on account of in the pandemic period, people were staying at home. So infections and the pain and all those things were much less. And to that extent, the sale did come down. But I think those are more cyclical in nature and those will come back. Net, I would want to say this actually, is that the earnings growth in this sector would be robust. And in fact, there is a scope for a positive earnings surprise here now also. In that context, even if the stocks have gone up, the valuations, though slightly higher than the averages, are not very high, and these are also much lower than the historical high valuation. So there is a scope for further valuation to go up, or at least remain here rather than coming down, simply because we will have a positive surprise in the earnings, and the profitability ratios will also likely remain very robust and may improve also. Because I've been stressing on the profitability ratios, so that's what I would like to stress once again. Since that ratios will remain strong, continue to remain strong, the multiples or the valuations will also continue to remain where they are.
Okay. So shall we squeeze one or two more questions, or?
It's up to you, depending upon
Yeah.
what the clients are asking, your clients are asking.
So there are questions on infra. One gentleman is asking about what is the how you look at the infrastructure market where NPA is too high, but at the same time there is a huge business potential, and obviously he means road, railway, energy, port, aviation, etc. So you have partly answered, but you want to take this?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is what my answer would be. Once again, I will repeat that, is that we have to differentiate between what we want and what we can really expect. We definitely want investment in infrastructure to grow. There is a clear cut demand supply mismatch, and we can always have more infra than less infra. So definitely want more infra. Definitely there is need for it. Whether it should come from the government or from the private, we don't, it does not matter. It has to come, and there is a business case for that, simply because the demand is much higher than supply. The issue was with respect to, not with respect to what we want, but what can realistically happen. And simply because there is a resource constraint in this current year, or maybe even the next year, which is why I do believe that even if I want it, the infrastructure sector may not grow in this current year or even in the next year.
Okay, okay. So one question also there's on SEBI rule on multi-cap. So the guideline which came, and no, so people, one gentleman is asking that SEBI rule of 25% each, for large cap, mid cap, and small cap in multi-fund, multi-cap category. So what if that recategorization happens, what is the suggestion for the retail investor? What should they do? If, because there are many fund houses where this exposure in multi cap to mid cap and small cap is low, and if they will go and buy mid cap and small cap to meet that regulation, the impact cost would be too big. So in any color
Yeah.
on that?
So I would only answer this one, that AMFI, which is the regulator, not regulator, the association of the mutual fund industry, has made a representation to the SEBI to either dilute the guideline or to create alternative avenues for a flexi cap category. So let us wait for that. Let us wait for the final guidelines, if at all, to come from SEBI. If there are no other guidelines which come from SEBI, then the last guideline which came is the final, in which case the implementation would be done by January of next year. But they have also subsequently came out with that the funds can or merge in some other existing funds. So most of the fund houses will take one of those two steps. But let me again not jump guns here and see like what individual fund houses do. So my advice to the investor would be to wait, having waited for so long, so one can wait for another month or so, and possibly one should be hearing from the SEBI as well as from the other mutual fund houses is what they intend to do, and take action only when it becomes clear what individual fund houses are doing, rather than in a speculative manner that this is what could happen.
Okay. So I think without asking a question on the growth versus value debate, the webinar will not be complete. So I just we hear a lot on the ongoing debate between growth versus value investing, and 2018-20 phase has been seen only handful of stocks have given have driven the market, right? And therefore the valuation gap between value and growth stocks are close to all-time highs. So what is your take on this, sir?
This debate should never happen. And these are the artificial labels given by us onto a particular company or particular fund manager or something. The companies never come and say that I am a value or I'm a growth. It is the label that we stick on their head, on top of them, even if they want it or do not want it. So this debate should not happen. There are a couple of other reasons also. Is that any growth company where there is no value will not give you returns. What it means is this: if you buy a high growth company at a very expensive valuation, then that will not give you return. We know that what happened to the Nifty companies, not Indian Nifty, but the US Nifty companies of 70s. They were the highest growth companies, but for many years after that, for next 15 years, there was hardly any return in that. At the same time, if there is no growth in a value company, then also you do not get return. They become a value trap. and their overall value continues to come down. I will not get into giving any names for this, but you understand that there are a set of companies where the growth is lacking, but the value is there. Value has been there for last many years, and so those will continue to underperform. So growth without value does not make sense, and value without growth does not make sense. Having said that, there are theoretical constructs also around growth and value, and that is surrounding the present value of the future cash flows. In case of growth companies, in case of any company, that's what people would have read in the theory, is that the present value, the current market value of any particular business is the present value of the future cash flows, nothing to do with what has happened in the past. So that is obviously is for the net worth, and on top of that, you add the present value of the future cash flows. In case of growth companies, so there are two elements in the value of a business. What is the existing value, right? Existing net worth, and what is the present value of the future cash flows, right? In case of growth companies, relatively existing value is small, and this component is much larger, because you will continue to get growth for many years, and their present value, even if you take at a whatever rate you want to take, but that component is larger. In case of value company, this component is big. That is the existing net worth or existing value is very large, and the component which will happen on account of growth in the future is very, very small. Now, one of the important parameters in computation of this present value of the future cash flows is the interest rate, the discount rate. If the discount rate is low and continues to come down, then the present value of the future cash flows is high and will go up. Rest all remaining same, the discount rate comes down, this value will go up. Thus, it will benefit the growth companies. On the other hand, the discount rate were to go up, then the present value of the future cash flows will come down, and in that case, the growth businesses will suffer. There would be much less impact on the value businesses. But this is the theoretical construct. The primary construct is what I already told, that growth without value does not mean much, and value without growth does not mean much. There's one more thing, and that is a very important thing, what is happening globally, and that is the nature of the economy and the nature of the stock market is changing. And it is changing from dependent on the higher tangible assets to intangible assets. In the past, the biggest industries and the biggest companies were the ones who had lots of assets, whether fixed assets or all kinds of other assets. But increasingly, especially in the last 10 years, the biggest company in the world are the one who hardly have got any assets, but they have got very high intangible value. And these are not only the corporate, but even the economies are also changing like that. So if you look at the top 10 market cap companies, you realize that only one company is from the old legacy world. The 9 of them, 10 companies are from the new economy, or the economy where the intangible assets is significantly more important. This distinction is only because if the economy is so much more dependent on the intangible assets, require much less capital to grow. It is also less inflationary in nature, and thus it takes out the impact of the future capex to grow. Like in one of the questions earlier, I had mentioned is that when the incremental capital capex comes into this business, then whether that is dilutive or accretive, and that's important from the perspective of the return from that particular sector or the stock. In case of intangible, the company is more dependent on the intangible assets. If the dependence on the future capex itself becomes low, then that is taken out of equation, which means the companies can grow off its own steam and thus create a lot more value, right? So even if they are growth companies, they will create a lot more value and thus will benefit the existing shareholders also. I hope I have answered this question, not in a straightforward manner, but I try to give 2 or 3 constructs to explain that one should not get lost into the value and growth, but one should be nimble and one should be looking at opportunities at both the ends of the spectrum.
Okay. So one question, in fact, I have, sir, you alluded to those tech companies, and we are not a product company here in India. but we are in the IT services, and this sector has done well. At least for the all large cap companies have reported very good set of numbers, boosted by obviously ramp up in the deals or a resolution of supply side issues or accelerated digitalization. So do you think the recent outperformance of IT sector will continue, or there is likely some divergence between a large and mid cap IT companies? What is your take on this sector, sir?
So I would be positive on this simply for the fact that this is we are in the beginning of the newer trend of migration towards cloud and digitalization. We just saw a glimpse of that in the current quarter. This was a new technology trend for the last 4 or 5 years, but the large scale migration was not happening because either people needed a push or they needed a catalyst to do so, and that push or the catalyst came on account of pandemic. And now that we have seen the proof of the concept both for this migration to cloud and digitalization, as well as from the work from home perspective, how things can be done differently and equally effectively, that means there will be newer paradigm with respect to the client company's investment into the technology. And thus, we are quite hopeful on account of the growth of the IT companies to accelerate from here as well. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is that how much of that is already into price in terms of the prices and stock valuations being at the higher end of the historical range. If we are comfortable with that, then from my perspective, I am a lot more positive on the business prospect of the Indian IT companies as compared to the valuations. Valuations is what we have to keep in mind.
So last question from my side, and maybe I'll if any participant you want to ask question, you can unmute and you can ask a question now. So I'll ask you one question on the ESG themes, which is gaining popularity, which is very popular in West and also gaining popularity here in India. So how do you feel ESG theme is likely to play out in India?
It is a very, very good question, and thanks for asking this question. It is still not picked up, but it's definitely is going to be it is definitely going to be a very important theme from the investment perspective. And here, the answer will not be in a more analog manner, but it would be more clear is that if the companies do not meet the ESG requirement, then it will become non-investable. Then it will not be that it is investable at a different prices or the valuation, that will simply become non-investable. We are already seeing some examples in this, but my sense is that this trend is going to become much more prevalent, and many more companies, those who do not meet this ESG requirement, will simply become non-investable. This will not be a trend only in India. This will be a trend elsewhere also, and possibly elsewhere it will happen even faster. So we will get a sense and we'll get an idea like how the investors are shunning those companies not meeting ESG at all. I just want to add one more thing here. In the past, the G part of the ESG, Indian market was always concerned about, and in the sense that reasonably the G factor was considered, and the companies where the governance was weak was getting penalized by the stock market. But increasingly, the E and S part, environment and the social part, will also get, I can't say like whether equal or how much it is, but will surely also get, the investors will have a look at the E and S also, not only the governance part. Globally, incidentally, the environment and social is much more important because there is a certain amount of the governance which is inbuilt into those companies. So from their perspective, E and S are much more important than the governance. But in the Indian context, I'm glad that you asked this question because it's going to be a very important investing feature in the future.
So we have touched upon so many things, sir, and maybe I said last question, but I'll pitch in one more question The monthly auto sale numbers for this month will start pouring in next few days, and reading from the results of the companies, there has been they have reported that rural demand has been stronger than the urban, which was seen in the Maruti or a Hero Honda case. So is there any play between rural versus urban, or two-wheeler versus tractor or a car or a heavy vehicle? So any color on this overall sector, sir?
So there always would be actually, but my advice would to not look these things at all, because these things will keep on changing. As of now, there is some play. 3-4 months back, there was a clear play for the rural economy or the economy depended upon the monsoons, because monsoons were normal. Those stocks or those part of the auto was doing much better. Something else will happen in the next month. For instance, if the government DA is strong, I'm giving a hypothetical example. If the government DA is there or is strong, or some payment is made in the hands of the people, then this will impact some other part of the auto sector. And investors cannot keep track of these things on a regular basis. Otherwise, one will end up trading a lot more. So one should be looking at from the perspective of the strength of the company. Are the companies able to gain market share? And in order to gain market share, what are they doing right things in terms of the products, in terms of the platform rationalization, in terms of the cost control, cost cutting, distribution, expansion, and all those kind of things. It's not a straight answer to your question. The straight answer to your question will get to know not in 3-4 days, only tomorrow, 1st of November, you will get the data. You will get to see like where the numbers are strong. So before the market opens on Monday, you will already have all this data. So there won't be any play left, much of play left. I do not worry about them. What has happened. What will happen, it will happen. I will worry about the fact that which companies can make best use of the changing dynamics and still grow their market share.
So
sorry about not answering the question directly.
No, you answered. So in fact, I just wanted to ask one more on the same supplementary question. So do you think the current demand momentum, which is likely to continue as mobility needs are going up, especially in urban areas after the lockdown, the economy recovers from the lockdown, or do you think the trend reversal away from shared mobility, which had disrupted the passenger vehicle segment, and shift towards an entry level hatchback is going to stay, or this is only a temporary phenomenon, or temporary in nature?
Yeah, no. So this is a very good point, and this is a very structural change which can happen, and in which case it might not show up into this current quarter or something, but this will show up into next couple of years also. Actually, if the personal mobility, because last 5-6 years, shared mobility was gaining share from the personal mobility, and because we found it much more convenient. And that was a trend. But increasingly, if COVID is going to remain with us for a longer period of time, then possibly personal mobility is going to gain a strength. And then that's the trend we'll see. Which is why, again, is very important from the perspective, since we cannot know or control those things. And this is one of the theses, and I agree to that thesis, in fact, what you just made. But again, I will go back and see from the perspective of the companies, whether it is shared mobility or personal mobility, will my investee company, will it gain market share or not? Because those are the industry dynamics which is impacting all the players in the car sector or the two-wheeler sector. I'm more concerned about whether my two-wheeler or my car company is gaining market share or not. If it's able to do that, I would be fine.
So thank you so much for very insightful discussion on the overall market strategy, sir. And we are very privileged to have this. And on behalf of the whole Dream Ladder team and the participants, I would like to say thank you to you. And
thank you, sir, and thank you to all the participants for sticking by me for last 90 minutes. So thank you very much for all the participants.